at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, nestled between the lower and the greater Caucasus Mountains, blessed with rolling hills, snow-covered mountain peaks, and lush green valleys as far as you can see, enticing the visitor with thermal hot springs and volcanoes, millennia of fascinating history and culture, old castles, and medieval villages, a relatively affordable cost of living, great internet, and a very generous visa policy. This country has been a relatively secret favorite among digital nomads for years. I am talking about Georgia. The country, not the US state, as everybody, including Wikipedia, seems to have to point out every time this place is mentioned. In this video, I will not only introduce Georgia as a country, point out its beautiful culture, history, and tourist destinations, as well as address its very, very generous visa policies. I will also address a reoccurring concern that I have read and seen popping up on social media, namely whether Georgia is still worth a visit after the huge influx of numbers of Russians that have moved to Georgia to avoid participating in the war in Ukraine. As usual, you will find timestamps, travel resources, and links to the activities that I am mentioning in this video down below in the description box. Using these while you make your travel arrangement does support me and my channel at no additional cost to you. So without further ado, let's take a look at Georgia. Georgia, or Sakartvelo as it is called by its own people, and which translates to the land of the Kartvelians, is a transcontinental country at the intersection of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. It is part of the Caucasus region and borders the Black Sea, Russia, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Depending on whom you ask, there are two self-declared autonomous regions or republics under Russian rule that are part of Georgia: Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The situation in these areas is calm at the moment, but tensions are underlying and governments advise against traveling here. Plus, you cannot even enter South Ossetia from Georgia at this point in time. But more details on that in the history bit. Georgia's currency is the Georgian lari, with $1 currently equaling 2.63 Georgian lari. The weather in Georgia is mostly continental, with hot summers and cold winters. I always feel the need to point out here that in Europe, most places do not use air condition in the summer, so if it is a 35-degree hot summer, there is no escape from the heat. And the language in Georgia is, surprise, Georgian, which is a Kartvelian language and is not related to any other language family. It has its own super beautiful looking script, as well as 3 alphabets, although only one of them is used these days. The next most common alphabet in use in the country would be Cyrillic, and only in third place is the Latin one, while the younger generation is capable of speaking English, particularly in the bigger towns such as Tbilisi. Learning some words in Georgian and learning to read some basic words in the Georgian script would go a long way if you decide to stay a little longer. This is particularly because Georgians are very proud of their language and their identity, and have fought very hard to keep them over the centuries and through the invasions of their lands. By the way, as I've already mentioned, Georgians call themselves Kartvelians, and their language Kartveli. These names were taken from Kartlos, who was a descendant of biblical Noah. Religion is another very important pillar of Georgian society, with 84% of the population being Eastern Orthodox Christians, and Georgia being one of the first countries in the world to adopt Christianity as a state religion, brought to the country directly by Jesus' apostle Andrew, who preached in an area of what is now Georgia. Other facts to know about Georgia are that it is the birthplace of Stalin, and they do still celebrate him being Georgia in his birthplace Gori, conveniently overlooking the whole horrible dictator part of history there. So if you are interested in that, go visit. On a lighter note, Georgians are famous for their hospitality, believing that a guest is a gift from God and that every guest actually could be God himself. And that's how they'll treat you. Georgia's national sports reflect the resilience and strength of its people. They hold many Olympic gold medals in wrestling and weightlifting. The country is also nicknamed the Cradle of Wine, with artifacts of wine production dating back to 6000 BC. So, as far as we know, Georgians invented wine, and to this day they are very good at making it. Okay, so let's look a little bit at Georgian history, so you understand the people, the culture, where they come from a little bit better. Avoid stepping on, people's feet, committing major faux pas, and just generally are a good guest in their country. Georgia's history goes back millennia and is super complex. And its recent history, including the Russo-Georgian War from 2008, is also super complex and complicated, with a lot of things happening in short succession in different places and both sides accusing each other of aggression. As usual, my brief introduction to a country's history is just that, a brief introduction. A taster to give you a little knowledge about what you can expect and what has influenced and kind of, formed the people there, but also hopefully a motivation to find out more yourself, either before you travel there or once you're there. So for this reason, please forgive me for leaving out a lot of details and for possible inaccuracies. The first settlements in the area of what is now Georgia date back 1.8 million years, at least according to the archaeological finds in the area, which makes them the oldest archaeological finds of human settlements outside of Africa. The Kartvelians have inhabited the area of what is now Georgia for more than 8,000 years. The name Georgia is nowadays commonly believed to have come from the Persian translation of the word wolf, translating Georgia to land of the wolves, which I find pretty cool. Georgia was and still is a very fertile land and has over the millennia had to deal with many invading powers trying to claim their lands. What is so special and a great source of pride for the Georgian people is that they have never bent to or assimilated into any of these powers. They have held on to their culture, their script, their language, and their identity through it all. Pretty remarkable. Somehow, the area seemed to always be stuck between rivaling superpowers, with always somebody fighting over them. Ottomans, Persians, and every other big empire in the region. In the 19th century, Georgia was conquered by the Russian Empire. After the Russian Revolution, the country gained a brief independence between 1918 and 1921. Before being annexed into the Soviet Union as the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. In 1991, due to increasing corruption in the Soviet Union, Georgia was the first of the Caucasus states to break away. Georgia's first democratically elected president at the time, Sviat Gamsakhurdia, followed a nationalist agenda, which also meant laying claim to the two previously autonomous regions. What followed was a coup d'etat by nationalist militants and civil war, while the two regions attempted to become independent from Georgia. Gamsakhurdia had to flee into exile. Georgia's communist leader, Edvard Shevardnadze, came to power, brought order to the country, and managed a ceasefire with South Ossetia. Conflict with Abkhazia worsened. This was followed by a genocide of Georgian citizens in Abkhazia. The new president, Edvard Shevardnadze, decided to join Russia's newly formed Commonwealth of Independent States to find protection and economic stability for his country. He was peacefully ousted during the Rose Revolution in 2003. The goal of the Rose Revolution was to become closer to the West by removing corruption and Soviet influence and integrating Georgia as a member of Europe and NATO. As a result, Georgia received money from Western powers, helping its economy and life standards increase. 2 pipelines were built to allow the West to access the oil in the Caspian Sea without relying on Russia. This presented a great chance for Georgia's economy and made them less dependent on Russia. The new president, Saakashvili, also backed out of the Russian Commonwealth of Independent States, a move to be ready to join NATO. Both Georgia and another big Russian neighbor, Ukraine, attended the NATO summit in Romania in 2008, where they were promised future NATO membership. Russia saw more and more former Soviet states joining NATO and the NATO border around its country growing, and was not amused to say the least. On August 7th, 2008, Georgia received word that Russian forces were on the move. Georgia sent its forces to the region of South Ossetia. What followed was the attempt of Georgian troops to take South Ossetia and Russian troops repelling them. Many buildings were destroyed and civilians were injured or killed. Russia accused Georgia of committing genocide in the region and used this as an excuse to enter Georgian airspace on August 8th. Russia soon had control over all of Georgia's airspace. On the ground, Russia had dozens of vehicles and troops in Georgia within hours, making it clear that they had anticipated the attack and secretly had placed troops in preparation a long time ago. Fighting continued for days, injuring and killing many civilians. Russia also attacked Tbilisi and the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, the very pipeline that had been built to make Georgia's economy independent from Russia. Over the next couple of days, Russia made more and more progress, and making progress almost all the way to Tbilisi. Both sides accused each other of war crimes. Both regions declared their independence and have actually, on different occasions, moved their borders, with Abkhazia now controlling an important power plant, and South Ossetia, with help of Russia, moving border fences far enough into Georgia to claim parts of the very pipeline I mentioned had been built to create economic independence from Russia. For digital nomads, Georgia has been advertised as an inexpensive digital nomad destination for years. However, the recent influx of the estimated 100,000 Russians and also some Ukrainians that are escaping either directly the war in Ukraine or being, for example, drafted to the Russian army because they do not wish to fight this war, has had a significant impact on cost of living, for example, in Georgia. Apartment prices, for example, in Tbilisi, where most refugees have settled, as well as in Batumi, have doubled in the last year. And there are fewer accommodations available. The Ukraine war has also led to rising food prices all over the world, making cost of living all in all higher in Georgia than it was maybe a year or two ago. This is, of course, unpleasant for digital nomads, yes, but let's all keep in mind that this is even more dramatic for the people that actually live in Georgia and do not have the privilege and the chance to just move somewhere cheaper and nicer and calmer whenever they can. Now, don't get me wrong, Georgia is still a super beautiful place to visit. The people are still very nice, and it is still relatively inexpensive compared to many other places in Europe. But it has certainly become a lot more expensive than was advertised a year ago. So let's look at some details, shall we? My numbers are from Numbeo and according to the website are accurate and updated last in February 2023. So I hope that these will give you an accurate representation of the price and the cost of living in Georgia right now. As usual, I translate the prices to US dollars to make it a more relatable currency for everybody watching. And as usual, these prices are an average of all the prices in the country. Estimated average cost for a family of 4 without rent per month will be $2,056. A single person is estimated to spend $567 a month without rent. And now let's break that down a little. An inexpensive meal in a restaurant will cost you approximately $9.51. A cappuccino will cost you $2.51. A monthly transport pass will cost you $15.22. Taxi starting tariff is $1.33, and you will pay 76 cents for 1 kilometer taxi ride. Basic utilities of an approximately 84 square meter apartment per month will be $72.55. Internet per month will cost you $19.39, and a 1-bedroom apartment in the city center, and here you can see the price rise quite significantly, will now cost $720. Whereas outside of the city center, the same studio apartment will cost you $519. Next, let's look at digital nomad must-haves. things you as a digital nomad need to be able to live your lifestyle. Obviously, the fact that Georgia is quite popular amongst digital nomads hints at that digital nomad infrastructure is quite well established. So, internet is widely available and stable in the bigger cities, with almost all Airbnbs and cafes offering public Wi-Fi. However, if you regularly need to download huge files and mainly spend your day doing video calls and streaming a lot, you might get frustrated with the speed. So as always, it does depend a little on your needs. Bigger cities also offer plenty of well-equipped co-working spaces, where the connection might be faster and where you can meet other like-minded nomads. In terms of infrastructure, the biggest airport for international travels are Tbilisi and Batumi. To travel within Georgia, you could, for example, take the bus. Buses and minibuses are an inexpensive way to get around. By the way, don't mind the schedule. The buses usually leave when they are full, not when the timetable says they will. Public transport is available particularly in bigger cities. These are served by buses, minibuses, and taxis. Tbilisi is the only city that has a metro that is quite inexpensive. However, most cities are quite walkable, so you will be able to save a lot of money on transport costs there. Although Tbilisi, with exception of the old town, is pretty spread out. So here you might actually want to try and understand the public transport system. When using a taxi, make sure you order one via an app, like Bolt, so you know the price, or negotiate the price with the driver beforehand. Another great way to get around in the country is by train. The in-country train network is decent and inexpensive, though not the fastest. And a good way to see the country independently and on your own schedule is always by car. And while the majority of roads are relatively okay, but certainly not in great condition, braving the traffic requires a strong mental constitution, particularly on the mountain roads. Accidents here are not uncommon due to risky overtaking maneuvers and speeding. Also, be prepared for livestock on the roads. Accommodation. Georgia does have all the typical accommodation options available, but as I mentioned, prices have risen significantly and there are fewer available options, particularly in the bigger cities such as Tbilisi and Batumi. So now that we've got the organizational basics out of the way, let's take a look at where to stay. Where will you find the best digital nomad infrastructure and hopefully also meet the most digital nomads to be able to form a community? The two most popular cities amongst digital nomads and the ones that offer the best digital nomad infrastructure in terms of internet accessibility and co-working spaces, particularly if you wish to stay longer, are Tbilisi and Batumi. But first, let's take a closer look at Tbilisi, the capital. Tbilisi is the most popular city in Georgia amongst nomads, expats and tourists. So for all its changes in the last year, it is also the place where you will probably be able to connect with the most like-minded people. It is a bustling city and a cultural hub, which makes it a great place for people who crave big city life and all its conveniences and activities. You will find many restaurants to explore the fantastic traditional Georgian cuisine, great bars and clubs, nice apartments, and a lot of cultural and historical things to explore. If you can find suitable accommodation, consider staying in the beautiful cobblestoned old town if you aren't staying for an extended period of time. That way you can navigate much of the city on foot or by public transport. On the downside, it is very busy here and quite touristy. Tbilisi's location also makes it a great starting point for many excursions into the rest of the country. It's a great hub from which to explore the nearby mountains and wine regions of Georgia. You can easily settle in Tbilisi and spend your days taking different day trips or tours to other regions of the country. In your spare time, here are some things to do in the city. Definitely visit the Narikala fortress to enjoy a fantastic view of the city. From the European Square, you can take a cable car up to the fortress. You will need a metro card to pay for the ride though. For another great viewpoint over the city, and maybe a little bit of an adrenaline rush, head to Tbilisi's amusement park, on top of the city's highest point, Mount Tatsminda. Tatsminda Park. You can enter the park for free, but you will have to pay to ride the roller coaster, Ferris wheel and other attractions it offers. The largest religious building in the world and the third tallest Orthodox church is also located in Tbilisi, the Holy Trinity Cathedral of Tbilisi. It was constructed in 2004 and might be worth a visit. Opinions differ on whether it is an architectural masterpiece or the biggest eyesore of the city. It is the main and biggest Orthodox Christian cathedral in Georgia. For some history about the country, visit the Georgian National Museum, which actually is a collection of several individual museums, giving you a super interesting insight into the country's history and development over the centuries. And if you now feel you need a break from all the action, visit one of the many bathhouses, which remind of Turkish bathhouses and hammams. Here you can spend a day and relax. Tbilisi is also a great home base if you would like to spend some time in nature without having to go too far. Tbilisi Sea could be a great option for that. This man-made lake close to the city is a great place to go for a hike and admire the impressive, massive Chronicles of Georgia monument, which shows the history of the country's royals. Batumi is the other popular digital nomad base in Georgia. It is the country's popular resort by the Black Sea, close to the Turkish border and a little younger and hipper than Tbilisi, I suppose. Its architecture is more modern and you can spend your free time sitting by the stone beaches of the Black Sea in hopes of spotting a couple of dolphins. Batumi has undergone a building boom in the last years, with some architecturally very interesting buildings having been added to the skyline. The city caters to gamblers who might cross over from Turkey, where gambling is illegal, as well as tourists looking for a modern resort location. I guess it could be considered Georgia's mini Las Vegas, and just like Las Vegas, it is a rather special place. Some love the modern, blinking resort kind of appearance, while others hate it. For those, the old town with its more traditional appeal might be an option. It centers around Europe Square, where you can find a lot of restaurants, bars and live music. To get around in Batumi, you will most likely be more reliant on ride shares. It is not as walkable as other Georgian towns. You should probably also know that it rains a lot in Batumi. And by a lot, I mean that it is the wettest city in the entire Caucasus region. Batumi too has plenty of cafes, bars, restaurants and co-working spaces where you can work. So its digital nomad infrastructure offerings should make it easy for you to settle here. Just like Tbilisi, it has experienced a huge influx of nomads since the Ukrainian war broke out, and rental prices have doubled in the last year. To get away from the modern, blinking lights of the city, head to the Botanical Gardens, a stone's throw away from the city. One of the largest botanical gardens in the former Soviet Union. From here, you will have a breathtaking view over the sea, while surrounded by exotic plants and greenery. Admire the waterfalls or take a swim in the river on a hot summer's day. You can even camp here if you'd like to stay longer, and they offer free Wi-Fi. Now that you've figured out your home base, let's look at some other beautiful destinations to visit while in Georgia. I will link relevant tours to places I mentioned in the travel resource section of the description. First stop, Mtskheta, the birthplace of Christianity in Georgia. The city of Mtskheta is really worth a visit. It encompasses so much of Georgia's magic. It is, for example, one of the oldest cities in the country, with traces of human settlement dating back over 4,000 years. It was also the country's former capital, until King Georgis changed the country's seat of power to Tbilisi. The Georgian Orthodox Church declared it a holy city in 2014, since it is the birthplace of Christianity in Georgia. You can admire 3 of the country's most important churches here. Svaneti, which is claimed to be the burial site of Christ's mantle, also referred to as the seamless robe of Jesus. So the robe that is said to have been worn by Jesus during or shortly before his crucifixion. Another one to visit would be Gelati Monestary, which has been built in the 6th century and offers a great viewpoint over the city. And 4th century Svaneti Monastery. It probably goes without saying, but forgive me if I say it anyways. It is super important that you dress modestly when you want to visit these monasteries. Georgia is full of stunning monasteries that just radiate spirituality and leave you moved even if you're not religious. Here are a couple of the most noteworthy ones. Gelati Monestary. Nestled into the green hills near Kutaisi in western Georgia, this is one of the first monasteries in the country. Founded in 1106 by King David IV. On the inside, it is painted with beautiful frescoes top to bottom. Vardzia Cave Monastery. What a special place! About 30 kilometers from Aspinza, this monastery was built into Erushi mountain during the second half of the 12th century. It was built for the country's ruler of the time, King Tamar, the first woman to ever have been crowned king, not queen. She was to use this to hide from invaders. By the way, you should really learn more about King Tamar. She was a badass, especially for her time. She came to power after her father's death, and even though a powerful elite tried to control her, amongst others by choosing a husband for her that was loyal to them, she freed herself from that control, including the husband, and under her rule, Georgia actually experienced its golden age. Won several important wars, gained a lot of territory, and was very prosperous economically. She is very revered in the country to this day. Anyways, I digress. Back to the monastery. It is more of an entire city than a monastery, and to this day you can see the remnants of 6,000 apartments, a throne room, wine cellar, a bakery, and a pharmacy. And the only reason you can see it from the outside is because a large earthquake destroyed 75% of the city in 1283, slicing off a piece of the mountain and revealing the hidden city inside. If you're looking for a great and popular photo motif from Georgia, it would be the Katskhi Column, a limestone pillar of approximately 40 meters in height. It has a little church on top that is only accessible by climbing. A monk has lived up there for the past 20 years, and visitors are not allowed. For more historic photo opportunities, head to Stepansminda by the military highway and at the foot of Mount Kashbek. Here you will find the famous and often photographed Tsminda Sameva Church, also referred to as Gergeti Trinity Church or Holy Trinity Church. This is a great starting point for some outdoor adventures. To feel like you're going back in time and to spend some time admiring jaw-dropping nature, head to the province of Svaneti in the Caucasus Mountains. Svaneti has 5 villages that are known to be Europe's highest permanent settlement, and the landscape up here is just beautiful. Hundreds of small, ancient watchtowers are spread out over the green lands and were used to protect the villages from invaders back in the day. You will pass wild rivers and dramatic gorges when driving on the mountain pass here, and could make a stop at any of the tiny historical villages. Time has stood still here. People still ride on horses, livestock still runs free on the road. It's a real experience. Peaceful, beautiful, and awe-inspiring. Staying on the topic of immersing yourself in nature. Well, by now, and considering its geographical location, you have probably guessed that Georgia is an outdoor lover's dream, right? Some of the most panoramic hikes, particularly if you would like to go on hikes for a couple of days, can be found in the Tusheti region. You will be hiking either one or several days through the Caucasus Mountains. A popular way to do multi-day trips is to just hike from village to village and spend the nights in the simple yet beautifully authentic and welcoming guest houses. And then there is one more outdoor adventure that cannot be missing in my videos, it seems. Rafting or canyoning. And a fantastic place to do so in Georgia is the Mtskheta Canyon. It is a 2.4 kilometer long gorge with 70 meter high walls cut into the green, lush forest by the Abasha River. The canyon used to be a private bathing spot for the Dadiani family, Georgia's ruling family during the mid-1800s. This and its beauty make it one of the biggest tourist attractions in the area. And while it certainly is beautiful, it is also expensive and admittedly a rather short experience. The trail around the area is 700 meters long. That's a little more than half a mile. And the boat ride only takes 15 minutes. So I guess it is up to you if it is worth it. There are plenty of other, less commercialized canyons in Georgia if you wish for a more authentic experience. Due to the length this video already has, I will leave the research up to you, should you decide to visit Georgia. Alright, so let's look at the visa situation, shall we? One of the reasons why Georgia is so popular amongst digital nomads is its incredibly generous visa policy. 95 countries can travel to Georgia and stay visa-free for up to 1 year, meaning just show up at the border and come in. Yes! And after that, you could technically just leave the country for a couple of days and come back and repeat this indefinitely. This also makes Georgia a really great destination to go to if you want to take your family with you. By the way, if that is something that is interesting to you, I have a whole playlist of digital nomad visas and digital nomad destinations for families. If your country is not one of those 95 countries, you can go through the e-visa process and get a visa for 30 to 90 days. So, like a tourist visa. In that case, or if you're leaving Georgia to renew your visa, check out some of my other videos, like for example, the one to Slovenia, up here, or the one that is coming next week to Georgia's neighboring country, Armenia. Thanks so much for today. Thanks so much for your time. I'll see you here in the next one. Bye bye.